before we actually start doing any operations on these, how many answers will we get from each of these? 2. How do you know by looking at just the equation how many answers you're going to have? Whatever the highest exponent is, that is the number of solutions that we will find. On number 1, what's the first thing I need to do if I'm going to try to find these solutions? Get x on a side by itself. How do I get x on a side by itself? That's the first thing I would do. Subtract from both sides? What can I do on number 1 to solve this? Add 64 to both sides. So I would have x squared equals 64. What do I do to get rid of the squared now? Square root. And if you do it to one side, got to do it to the other side. How many answers do we get when we take a square root of both sides? 2. Tell me about those answers. Positive and negative. So I have x equals plus or minus the square root of 64. Do we know the square root of 64? Yes. What is it? 8. So x is equal to plus or minus 8, which means x equals positive 8 or x equals negative 8. This one also has another way of solving it. We could also solve by factoring. So if we're going to solve by factoring, how many terms does this have? 2 terms. X squared minus 64 equals 0 has 2 terms. Which 2 terms does it have? A, B, or C? A and C. This is that special situation called a difference of 2 squares. And so when I go to factor this, I have 2 factors that are almost identical, except one has a plus and one has a minus. And I square root my A term. What is the square root of x squared? X. That goes at the beginning of each factor because it came at the beginning of my expression here. And then I also take the square root of 64. What is the square root of 64? 8. I put that at the back of each of these. And then I take each factor and set it equal to 0. So over here I would subtract 8 from both sides. I get one answer that is what? Negative 8. When I solve the other one, I would add 8 to both sides. And so I get that x is positive 8. I end up with the same 2 answers no matter which method I use. So far, so good? Yep. All right. Number 2. Do you guys want to solve this by factoring or like we did it the first way? First way. The first way is called the square root property because we take a square root of both sides. What would I start off by doing here if I'm going to use the square root property? Add 36 to both sides. Love it. All right, so that would give me 2x squared equals 36. What would I do to it after that? Not yet. Divide both sides by 2. What is 36 cut in half? 18. So I'm going to have x squared equals 18. How do I get rid of the squared? Square root. If you do it to one side, you do it to the other side. We get how many answers when we take a square root? 2 plus or minus the square root of 18. Is this like the previous problem? You guys could tell me the square root of 64. Can you do that with 18? No, then I'm going to have to break it down. Can I break it down at all? 18, what two things multiply together to give me 18? 9 and 2, or you could say what? 6 and 3. I like 9 and 2, though, because there's something I like about 9 under the radical. Do we know what the square root of 9 is? Yes. Square root of 9 is 3. Do we know what the square root of 2 is? Is that a nice, pretty number? Then we just leave it as the square root of 2. So I have that x is plus or minus 3 square root of 2. I'm going to scoot that over a little bit, I think. So that means that x is 3 square root of 2, or x is negative 3 square root of 2. And those would be my solutions here. Very last one. Tell me where to start. Add 16 on both sides. So I get negative x squared equals 16. What would I need to do next? Divide both sides by negative 1. It's going to cancel out the negative here. So now I'm going to have x squared equals negative 16. What next? Square root both sides. Remember, it has to be just x squared before we take a square root. Squared and square root cancel each other out. We get how many answers? 2. X equals plus or minus the square root of negative 16. I love that you jumped ahead of me there. Negative 16, we can't put a negative square root into our calculators, but I can separate that negative out. We know the square root of 16 is 4. Square root of negative 1 is what? What is the square root of negative 1? I. The imaginary number. X is equal to positive or negative 4i. So x equals 4i. Or x equals negative 4i. All right. Tomorrow, if you are a freshman, sophomore, or junior, you will come to this class. However, it will be right after 4 hours of testing and then lunch. I am not going to conduct formal instruction tomorrow. You guys are going to be in desperate need of a brain break after 4 hours of testing. So tomorrow, during our class time, we're going to keep things at a low volume level conversational tone. You can talk with your friends. If what you just need is a break after 4 hours of testing, that's fine. If you want to work on studying for your test and you want to work together or you want to work with me, I'm fine with that. But like I said, I'm not going to do any formal instruction. So today is our last in-class day to review as a large group. I want you guys to go ahead and pull out your review packets. We did problem number 1 together yesterday, but I want to know what other questions from this packet you guys would like me to go through. I am going to post the video from today from all 3 sections of my class. So just because we don't go over it in here today does not mean that it will not be on one of the videos. Which problems would you guys like to see? Number 5 and 9. Sounds good. Don't forget on number 4, since I have to go past it, that middle equation on number 4 is supposed to have subtraction before the 21, not a plus. It was originally printed with a plus sign, but it's supposed to be a minus. Make sure you make that change. Number 5 and number 9 are the two that we're going to do first. Ooh, number 5, square root property. This is what we were just doing on the bell work. So I want to get x squared all by itself. What would I need to do to both sides to get the x squared alone? Add 5 to both sides. So I'm going to have x squared equals 13. What do I do now to get x all by itself? Square root, and if you do it to one side, have to do it to the other side. So the squared and the square root cancel each other out. I get 2 answers from doing this, positive or negative, square root of 13. Is square root of 13 one of those numbers that you know the square root of? No. Can we break it down at all to see if there's any perfect squares in there? What multiplies to 13? 1 and 13. This is as broken down as I can get it. So x is equal to the square root of 13, or x is equal to negative square root of 13. What about if they gave me decimal choices? If this was a multiple choice and they only had decimal answers, what could I do? Put it into your calculator. When I do square root of 13 on these yellow calculators, and I hit enter, what does it give you? Same thing. How do I make it give me the decimal then? Arrows right above the enter key. So when we put this in decimal form, I get x equals 3.60, and then when I round it, it would be 606. Or x is equal to negative 3.606.
Are you okay with the square root form? Or?
If you are doing it for me on the test and it does not say write your answer as a decimal, I'm okay with what I put inside that black box. In fact, that's my preference. We're going through this other piece in case it gives you multiple choice options and that first bit is not on there. Or if it said choose all that are correct, and there's some square roots and some decimals, we want to make sure that we know how to look for it both ways. All right, number 9 was the next one I was asked for. Number 9 is a long one. There's lots and lots and lots of parts to number 9. Do number which one after that? Number 4 after that? Yeah. So we'll do number 9 and then we'll go back to number 4. All right. On number 9, part A, what's in between the 2 sets of parentheses? Addition. Whenever you see addition in between 2 complex numbers, we're going to line them up exactly as they are, and we're going to combine them together. So what do I get when I combine the 4 and the 5 together? 9. What about when I combine 2i and negative 6i? Or sorry, negative 8i. I read that wrong. Negative 6i. So I have 9 minus 6i. Are we still adding on part B? No. What are we doing? Subtracting. When you subtract, we're going to do it almost like we did part A, except I'm going to distribute that negative sign just to the piece that comes after it. So I'm going to have negative 6 and a positive 4i. Combine those two together. You're going to have to sit up for me, hon. To like stay sitting straight up in your seat. What do I get when I combine a negative 4 and a negative 6 together? Negative 10. What do I get when I combine 3i and 4i? 7i. Part C, I see the same thing. In between these, I see subtraction. So I'm going to distribute the negative only to the second set of parentheses. The first one stays exactly the same. When I distribute that negative, I get 3 minus 5i. What happens when I combine the negative 3 and the positive 3 together? They cancel out. 2i minus 5i? Negative 3i. Are we adding or subtracting on part D? We're multiplying. They don't show me an operation, and so I understand that that means to multiply. When we multiply these together, we're going to use double distribution. So I'm going to take the 2 that's in front here, and I'm going to distribute that to both pieces in this second number. What's 2 times 3? 6. What's 2 times 4i? What's 2 times 4i? 8i. I have a positive 8i. Then I'm going to take this negative 2i and distribute it to both pieces. What is negative 2i times 3? Negative 6i. What is negative 2i times 4i? Negative 8i. Something else. I have I times I, so it would be I squared. 2i, 4i, 8i squared. Do we have any like terms that we can combine together? 8i and negative 6i. And then we talked earlier, I squared can be replaced with what? Negative 1. So I have 6 plus 2i minus 8 times negative 1. What is 8 times negative 1?
8.
Just a plus 8. So 6 plus 2i plus 8. Have we combined all of our like terms together? What can I still combine? 6 and 8, which combine to give me what? 14. So I have 14 plus 2i as my final answer here. What operation are we supposed to be doing on part E? Multiplication again. So double distribution, just like I did on part D. I'm going to take this 4 and I'm going to distribute it to both pieces. 4 times 3? 12. 4 times negative 2i. Negative 8i. What else do I need to distribute? The I. Negative I times 3, so minus 3i. Negative I times negative 2. Positive 2i squared. All right. What like terms do I have? Negative 8 and negative 3. Is there anything else that I should combine or replace? I squared gets replaced with? Negative 1. So I have 12 minus 11i plus 2 times negative 1. What is 2 times negative 1? Negative 2. So 12 minus 11i minus 2. And now I see I've got these two like terms to still combine. What do I get when I combine the 12 and the negative 2? 10. 10 minus 11i. 3 pieces left to go. What do you notice about part F? Square root. What's under the square roots? Negatives. So the square root of negative 6, 6 times negative 1. So that's the square root of 6 times the square root of negative 1. I can do the same thing with the square root of negative 4. So that's the square root of 4 times the square root of negative 1. Square root of negative 1 is the same as what? I. Do you know the square root of 6? All right, let's see if we can break it down at all. I don't know the square root of 6 off the top of my head. What numbers multiply to give you 6? I heard 2 and 3. Do you know the square roots of either one of those? Can we break either one of those down more? Then I just leave it as square root of 6. What about square root of 4? Is that one that we know the square root of?
Yeah.
What is the square root of 4? 2. So I'm going to multiply these pieces together. What is I times I? I squared. Okay, so I have 2 I squared square root of 6. Can't I make a substitution in the place of I squared? That's the same as what? Negative 1. So I have 2 times negative 1 times the square root of 6. What is 2 times negative 1? Negative 2 square root of 6 would be my final answer. What about G? Square root of negative 81. 9i. We're going to break this up to be 81 times negative 1. So I do the square root of 81 times the square root of negative 1. This is the same thing as I. Square root of 81 is 9, so I get 9i as my final answer here. H. H is a lot like F that we just did. So I'm going to get the negatives out of there. So square root of 27 times the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 9 times the square root of negative 1. We know the square root of negative 1 is the same as I. Do we know the square root of 27? Is this one that we can break down more? What multiplies to give you 27? 3 and 9. Do you know the square roots of either one of those? Yep. Square root of 9 is 3. Do we know the square root of 3? Then I just leave it as square root of 3. So this is 3 square root of 3. Do you know square root of 9? 3. So I'm going to multiply all of those together. I'm going to multiply this 3 and this 3 together. What's 3 times 3? 9. So I have 9. And then I've got I times I. What is I times I? I squared. And then we still have this square root of 3 here. I multiplied the 2 3's together, but not the one that's underneath the radical. I did the 9 from the blue 3 and the purple 3. I've got them underlined in orange. This right here and this right here. And I still have the radical 3 at the very end. So we still have a 3 that's underneath our square root. What can I replace I squared with? -1. So I have 9 times -1 times the square root of 3. What is 9 times -1? -9. So this is -9 square root of 3. Number 4 was the next one that was requested. Does anybody want to put another one on deck? All right, 4 and then 7. Oh, 7's a good one. And then you said 6? Yeah, I was going to do number 4 because that was the next one requested. Oh, the very last one? Yeah, so we'll do 4, 7, and then we'll do number 12, the very last one? Or is it this that you're asking for the last one? Okay, got it. I was misunderstanding what you were asking here. Number 4, I'm going to do all these pieces here. If I am solving these by factoring, what does it have to be equal to? 0. Equal to 0. Check. What's the next thing I check for? Yes. Do we have a GCF on this first one? Yes. What is our GCF here? 5 and what else do they have in common? They both have an x in common. So I'm going to take a 5x out of each piece. What would I have left over if I take a 5x out? X plus, not 2x, just 2. Here's how I know. If you do 5x times x, what do you get? 5x squared. If you do 5x times 2, what do you get? 10x. That's what I had to start with. How many factors do we have here? 2. What does the F in GCF stand for? Factor. This is a factor. And this is a factor. By the way, this is my factored form. This is what I'm going to write down on that line where it says factored form. I have 5x times x plus 2 equals 0. This is my factored form. What do I do with each of those things that I identified as factors? What do we do with our factors? Make them equal to 0. 5x equals 0. X plus 2 equals 0. What do I do right here to get x all by itself? Yep, divide by 5 on both sides. What is 0 divided by 5? 0. So x equals 0 is one of my answers. What do I do here to get x all by itself? Subtract 2 from both sides. And so I get x equals -2 for my other solution. All right. Middle one. Are we equal to 0? Yes. Do we have a GCF? No GCF. How many terms? 3 terms. So I'm going to do my box and my x. My a term goes up here, that's my x squared. C goes down here, that is -21. I have to multiply the coefficients on a and c together. What's in front of my x squared? What was in front of the x squared? 1. So I'm doing 1 times negative 21. So I need two numbers that multiply together to give me negative 21, but that add to give me my b term. What is my b term? Negative 4. What kinds of numbers will multiply to 21? 3 and 7. Is the b positive or negative? Negative. So that means the bigger number here has to be a negative. Which one is negative? 7 has to be negative. So negative 7x, positive 3x. What can I take out of these top two? What do they have in common? X. What about down here? What can go into both of those? What do they have in common? 3. Positive 3 or negative 3? Positive. Why is it positive? You have to sit up here. Because the box that it's touching is positive. So here's one of my factors. What do these two have in common? X. What about these two? Negative 7. Why is it negative again? Touching a negative box here. So x minus 7 is my other factor. X plus 3, x minus 7 equals 0. This is my factored form. So that's what I would write on this line right here. X plus 3, x minus 7 equals 0. Does it matter what order I write those factors down in? Nope. It can be x minus 7 and then x plus 3 if I want it to. This is a factor. And this is a factor. What do I do with those factors? Set them equal to 0. X plus 3 equals 0. X minus 7 equals 0. What do I do right here to get the x all by itself? Minus 3 on both sides. So x equals negative 3. One of my solutions. What about here? Add 7 to both sides. So x equals 7. All right, last one. Do we have a GCF here? Nope. It is equal to 0. There is no GCF. How many terms? 3 terms. So I'm going to do my x and my box. A goes here, so 3x squared. C goes down here, that's a negative 2. What number am I going to have up here? Negative 6, because remember I have to multiply A and C together. So I'm going to be multiplying 3 and negative 2. What is our B value? 1. What multiplies to negative 6 but adds to 1? Yes. We have 3 and negative 2. So I'm going to have 3x and negative 2x. What do these two boxes have in common? 3x squared and 3x. They have a 3x in common. What do these two have in common? negative 2. So 3x minus 2 is one of my factors. What do these two have in common? 3x squared and negative 2x? Just an x. What about 3x and negative 2? One. The only thing they have in common is 1. Positive 1 or negative 1? Positive 1. All right, so I have 3x minus 2 and x plus 1 equals 0. This is my factored form. What do I do with each of those factors? Set them equal to 0. So here's a factor. So I take 3x minus 2, set it equal to 0. And this is also a factor. So I take x plus 1 and set it equal to 0. Let's do that one first because that one's faster. How do I get x all by itself there? Minus 1 on both sides. Jaden, head up for me, dear. X equals negative 1 is one of my solutions. For this one right here, I want to get x all alone, but I'm going to have to do two things. What do I do first? Yep, plus 2 on both sides. So I get 3x equals 2. Divide both sides by 3. And so x is 2/3. All right. Number 7 was the next one that was requested. Number 7 is a really good one for us to talk about. Very last sentence. What are we supposed to be finding here? Very last sentence. Yes, the vertex. The vertex of our parabola is HK. So we can either use that completing the square method to put it into vertex form, or we can find H, and then we can use that to determine K. If we're going to find H, I'm going to use my axis of symmetry formula. This right here is how we find H. And that's the way I'm going to do this problem. Use x equals negative b over 2a to find H. What are we substituting in for B? 192. That's our B value. What are we going to substitute in for A? Negative 32. So in my numerator, I have negative 192. In my denominator, I have negative 64. What do you get when you put that into your calculator? Negative 192 divided by negative 64. 3. This is H. So on the vertex, I know the x part of the vertex is 3. to find k, we're going to sub our answer for h into the equation. So our equation is negative 32, and then we're going to make a substitution and square it, plus 192, and then we make a substitution because there's a variable there, plus 9. What are we putting in these blank spots? Three. And then I'm going to go through and start to simplify this. What is 3 squared? 3 squared is 9, plus 192 times 3, plus 9. What's negative 32 times 9? Negative 288. What is 192 times 3? 500 and check it one more time for me. 76, yes. Plus 9. Then we add those pieces together. Negative 288, 576, and 9. What do we get? 297. This is our k value. So that's the other part of the vertex. All right, so we found our vertex. Now we're supposed to interpret it. It says the projectile reaches a height of, which one of those numbers is the height? The y, the 297 is my height. 297 feet, blank seconds after launch. 3. So my height is my y value, my time is my x value. And if you look up at that original equation they gave me, it has t squared and t. We're putting that in for the time. So our input variable, our x variable, is time. So here was our time and our height. What else did you guys want to see? We've got about 8 minutes until D lunch starts. Which one? 10 and 11. All right, discriminant. The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. I won't give you just that all by itself on the test, but where will I give it to you at? It's in the quadratic formula. It's right here. You'll see it there. If we're going to find the discriminant, it has to be equal to 0. Is part A equal to 0? Yep. So I'm going to do b squared minus 4ac. What is our value for b?
7.
Close. Negative 7. Here's b. So negative 7 squared minus 4 times, what are we going to put in for a? 15. What are we putting in for C? Negative 4. At this point, you can pop this all into your calculator, just as is. Make sure you put the parentheses around things. What do you get when you put this whole thing in your calculator? 289. That is my discriminant. That's what's going to go underneath my radical. Can I do the square root of 289 on my calculator? Or will the calculator give me an error? Try it. Can the calculator do the square root of 289? Yep. Can the calculator do it? Yep. If the calculator can do it, then it is not complex. Complex is another way of saying imaginary. So I'm saying that this one is not complex because it does not have a negative under the radical. Is it one real root or two real roots then? Two. Because when we take a square root, what's in front of the square root in the quadratic formula? Plus or minus. So we're going to add this and subtract it. I'm going to get two different answers from doing that. Middle one. Is it equal to 0? No, I need it equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract x squared from both sides. And now I've got it equal to 0. So now I'm going to do b squared minus 4ac. What am I putting in for b? 10. So I have 10 squared minus 4 times what? Negative 1. Yes. And c is negative 25. When you pop this whole thing into your calculator, 10 squared minus 4, and then parentheses negative 1, parentheses negative 25, you get 0. Is that going to be complex? Is that imaginary? No. If I add the square root of 0 and I subtract the square root of 0, I don't get different numbers. This is one real root. Last one, part C. Is it equal to 0? Have to have it equal to 0 before I can do the discriminant. 2x squared minus 1x plus 2 equals 0. Then we'll do our discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. What are we putting in for b? Negative 1 squared minus 4 times, what are we putting in for a? 2. And what are we putting in for c? 2. So here's b, here's a, here's c. What do you get when you pop that all into your calculator? Negative 15. Where does the discriminant go again? It goes under the radical. So I'm going to have the square root of negative 15. What does that mean? 2 complex roots. Because I have that negative under there. That's why it's complex. Number 11. You can solve this using any of the methods that we have learned. Some of the methods that we have learned. We've done factoring. If we're going to use factoring, it's got to be equal to 0. We've done completing the square. We've done the square root method. These are very closely related. And then we've also used quadratic formula and graphing. If you're going to use quadratic formula, that's another one where it has to be equal to 0. So when I look at these equations, which method strikes you as the best? Are they already equal to 0? No. We can get them equal to 0 so that we could use factoring or quadratic formula. But there's something that I notice. There's something that I notice about this side over here. Do we know of numbers that will multiply to 64 and add to 16? 8 and 8. This whole thing over here will be x plus 8 squared. Multiplies to 64, adds to 16. When these two numbers are the same, I'm going to get a squared factor. When I see something like everything over here is inside the parentheses, I only have a squared on the outside, how can I get rid of that squared? How do we get rid of a squared? Square root. And if we do it to one side, have to do it to the other side. So over on the left, I'm going to be left with x plus 8. How many answers will I have on the right? 2. One that is positive and one that is negative. What is the square root of 49? 7. I have 2 cases because I have a plus 7 and a minus 7. So x plus 8 is equal to 7. X plus 8 is equal to negative 7. What do I do right here to get x all alone? Minus 8 from both sides. What is 7 minus 8? Negative 1. So x equals negative 1. What about over here? Yep, minus 8 from both sides again. What is negative 7 minus 8? Negative 15. All right. Since the bell rang, I'm going to go ahead and shut it down for now, but part B, you do almost exactly the same way. We're going to get a different squared factor. We're going to get a different thing when we take the square root over here, but I would do it the exact same way that I did this one. Right? I have posted all of my answers for you guys. If you go into modules and you click on today's date and you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, way down at the bottom, there's the key. If you click on that, it'll open up and show you all of my completely worked out solutions there.